Hi guys, and welcome to our webinar today, Transforming Your Business by Creating an Actionable Customer Journey Map. We are very excited to be presenting today, and we look forward to talking a little more about what a customer journey map is, how we can use it, the value, and how to get started. And if you're interested, at the end of the webinar, you can get in touch with us and we can talk to you about how to get your first customer journey map started. I'm going to jump in real quick and introduce our speakers, and then we are going to get right to it. So welcome, Melissa. Melissa is our information architect, and she's going to tell you a little more about what she does.
Thank you, Kazan. Yes, hello. I'm Melissa Woodson. I'm the information architect and content strategist at Balance Interactive, and my focus is mainly on the user experience. So I want to make sure that whatever we're doing digitally, whether it's a website or something else, is going to provide the best experience for your customers and your users.
Great, thank you, Mel. And next we have me, Kazan Knapp. I'm the marketing director for Balance Interactive. I do all of the internal marketing, and I am the one that puts together all the information that gets you to participate in the webinars like today. And then we have Ann Mader. Ann is our research strategist, and can you tell us a little more about what you do?
Yeah, hi, thanks, Kazan. I am a researcher and digital strategist for Balance. I work with our customers to really look at who their members are, who their customers are, dive deep into that, and use all of that information to come up with digital and social strategy.
Great, well, thank you. And with that, we're going to jump right in here to what most of you are probably wondering is what is a customer journey map? And I'm going to have Ann and Melissa explain a little more about what a customer journey map is and what the value is of using one for your organization.
Yeah, so a customer journey map is a very useful tool for helping an organization or a company really look through the lens of their customer and have this outside-in perspective of their customer journey, whether it could be through their entire customer life cycle, it could be a journey, their experience with a product, it could be their experience with a website. It's really looking at various touch points through that life cycle and seeing that customer experience, whether they have high experiences or high value experiences or low value experiences, and really seeing where there are opportunities to provide better experiences for the customer throughout whatever that journey is that we are measuring. And we'll speak more about what touch points are as we go along, but it's really a way to see, are the goals and expectations of the customer being met, and whether those goals align with the organization and the company.
Great, and I'm going to jump here to an actual completed customer journey map, so we can just look at what the completed product looks like over here, and maybe we can just speak to some of these points here and what these mean and what they are.
Right, so this is a great example of a thorough customer journey map of an e-commerce experience that a customer may have through a website, and it really captures what the customer is thinking, what they're doing, what they're feeling, and then overall experience through the different phases of that customer life cycle in that experience. So at the top you'll see some stages of research and planning and product and discovery, the ordering process, and then below that you'll see different touch points. And what the customer journey experience really does is it measures those touch points based on the customer's perspective, so you really get an idea of what's working really well and what doesn't work so well, and maybe where there's breakdowns and there's opportunity. And it gives you a holistic picture of the customer and their experience.
Right, and I think it's really important too to know that a customer journey map isn't going to capture every nuance of the customer's experience. There's going to be lots of little details that don't necessarily get shown through a journey map, but it's more a document or a deliverable that allows the people within your organization to engage in the idea of customer service and how can you be a better organization for your customers and meet their needs in ways that are more useful to them.
Hmm. But you're also at that point, you are probably going out and finding out more about your customers and those little nuances that are happening during their lives.
Absolutely. Yep,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah, then if you're just like, and I love your saying of, from the inside out is the wrong way to look at it. If you're, all sitting in a conference room somewhere and you're talking about what you think your customers want versus just going out and finding out what it is that your customers want. So,
Right, yeah, it's really taking it to the human level and making it customer centric. By doing a customer journey map, you gain empathy for your customer. You know where they are, where they're coming from, what they're looking for, and what their expectations are, so that you can better plan whether it's marketing strategies, maybe it's your overall organizational strategy, or maybe it's just how you're going to, create a better product for your customer. Many times organizations only look from that, inside out perspective, and they're losing some really valuable opportunities by doing that. So it's very important to really gain that customer perspective to have a more customer-centric and valuable experience.
mm-hmm. And Melissa, I have a question here real quick that I think is a really good question. What role does user experience research and design play in a customer journey map experience like this?
I think it's really important to have a customer journey map as kind of a jumping off point when you get to maybe the digital components of a project and you start talking about website. But I think it's really important to know what is the user's experience, what roadblocks are they hitting along the way, what things do they need that they don't even know that they need. Maybe it's that they log onto your website and they realize, oh, you can only view this specific component of the website in Safari. So say you have something like an appointment management system. So I can log in, I can create an account, I can look up when an appointment is available for me, and maybe I can book that appointment online, but I can only do it in a specific web browser. And if that web browser isn't my preferred web browser, then maybe you're going to lose me as a customer. So it's important to look at what are the things that your user actually needs? Not just, oh, I need to provide a place for my customers to make an appointment online, but what web browser are they using? What is the bandwidth of their device? Do they have a good secure internet connection? Are they trying to make an appointment when they're on their phone? So we look at all these different things, all these different pieces that we can learn in our research, and those feed into both the customer journey map and then ultimately the digital experience that we develop when we create a new website or a new digital property.
Great, that's awesome. Well, with that, we're going to jump into the actual components that make up a customer journey map, so we can talk a little more through what those mean. At Balance, we talk about these, because we talk about them often, and so they become something that's just part of our vocabulary. But we want to quickly just run through some of the explanations of what these are. And here we have the anatomy of a map. We have personas. We have a timeline. We have the events or activities. The phases of when it's happening, related information, relative highs and lows, which are the emotions, and then the pain points and opportunities. And we actually at Balance, we call them something a little different that I've heard people say is a really good way of explaining them, and Melissa will touch on that now. So we're going to jump in here real quick. And you do a lot of persona development. Can you quickly just speak about this before we get into the other components?
Sure. So a persona is really a representation of a group that you're mapping throughout the customer journey. So it could be your members of your organization, or it could be your non-members of your organization, or it could be, you could be looking at a young segment of personas or an older segment. It really depends on how you want to categorize the different groups that you're measuring throughout the experience. So the persona is basically a representation of that group that you're measuring. So in this one, this was a non-member of an organization, and we used her just to represent that persona as she went through her customer journey.
Are they usually categorized as people in the same age category, or is it more of the likes or dislikes of them, or is it really just a mixture of age, what they're interested in?
It really depends on what you're mapping out. What if you're looking at your entire organization and you're looking at your membership, you want to map out people who are currently members, and maybe you break that down into, young and older demographics. It just really depends on what exactly you're measuring and how that's going to suit the goals of your customer experience map and the reasons that you're doing it. So you really want to think about those personas before jumping into your mapping out your experiences. And also before you start doing your research, you want to think about those personas so that you know exactly the right questions to ask and what the data that you're collecting. And so you're able to group that based on that experience.
Right, okay, so I'm going to play this forward here. I'm going to get to the next component, timeline.
Yeah, so the timeline is basically just the life cycle of whatever you're mapping. So whether it's an entire customer life cycle or maybe an event experience that you're mapping, you first lay out, what's the timeline from beginning to end. And then once you've already laid out the timeline, then we start to look at the events and activities. That's the second component. And the events and activities are basically things that your customer is doing independent of the organization. So, things that they're deciding, maybe devices that they're using, things like that they would engage in regardless of what you put out there. So, there are ways that you as an organization can impact those things and the way that they go about things, but there are certain things that people are going to do independent of your organization. Then we get into the next section, which are the phases. And this is basically just the phases of the life cycle that you're mapping. So, you might start with, in the first phase, all the way to the left there, you might start with, the research and discovery, where somebody's just starting to learn about your product or organization. And then you get into the second phase, which is where they're actually engaging with the product. And, they might make a purchasing decision then. And then you get into the third phase, which would be they're using the product. And maybe, they need to come back to you and get more information, or they need some support with the product. And then the final phase would be, just for example, it could be maybe a maintaining that relationship. Maybe there's an add-on product, maybe there's an add-on membership, or a way to get people further engaged, a board of directors experience, an annual meeting, things like that. Mm-hmm. Then the other thing that we want to look at here, in addition to the timeline, the events and activities, the phases, is this related information. And this is basically our data. So we might have some quantitative data, things like demographics, preferences, so on and so forth, things that we have real hard numbers on that are going to inform our customer journey map. While customer journey maps a lot of times are built around qualitative data, it's always good to have that related information, have some real qualitative information to refer back to, basically. So the next part then is going to be your touch points. And the touch points are essentially anywhere the organization and the customer cross paths. So anywhere they are touching your organization or you are touching them, there's some kind of interaction there, we call that a touch point. And then with the touch points, we also want to make note of their relative highs and lows, their emotions. How are they feeling about certain interactions? Do they like it? Do they dislike it? Are they frustrated? Are they happy? Are they excited? Have you done something that they weren't expecting and they're kind of delighted by it? There's sometimes that you have a customer experience where you're using something and you go, oh, that's really cool. So that's definitely a high point versus a low point where you're just trying to do something really simple that you think should be a simple transaction and you start to get frustrated, and then maybe you give up on it altogether, or maybe you search for an alternative. Maybe there's a different organization or tool that can help you do it better. So that's what we would call a low point. And then once we kind of start to identify those relative highs and lows, we can see the pain points and the opportunities. And a lot of times within our organization here at Balance, we'll call those places the moments of truth. So we'll say, oh my goodness, look at this. We're working really hard to do, you know, activity X, and we're trying to make this really great for people, and they hate it. So that's a moment of truth for us where we say, oh my gosh, well, if they hate it, then we've got to fix that. We've got to do something completely different, and we got to figure out what do they actually want so that we can make the organization experience better. Or if we're doing something and it's pretty low effort on our part, but people really like it, you know, that's important for us to note too, because we can see, hey, this is really working, and maybe learn from that and say, why is this working so well, and how can we apply it in other areas of our business? So those are definite moments of truth, moments of realization where we can figure out what our real opportunities are going to be.
Great, and I just want to recap here. So these touch points down here, which are these arrows facing inwards to each other, and then these emotions over here, are they always going to relate? Is there always going to be an emotion associated with a touch point?
I wouldn't say necessarily a negative or positive emotion, but I think, you know, sometimes people can be ambivalent, or they, you know, don't really register an emotion. You know, it's okay, I'm going to this website. You know, they don't necessarily have a, oh, this is great, or oh, this is lousy. They're just, okay, here I am on the website. They've landed there. There's not necessarily an emotion there. But you can look at that also as an opportunity, because we're going to talk a little bit more about this later, but the website is the front door to your organization. It's the place where people first, a lot of times, first touch your organization or first interact with you. So that's a real opportunity to make it a positive and to make it a good emotion versus a, I don't care, or gosh, this organization looks like they're really behind the times, or you know, something like that. We really want to make sure that if there's not an emotion, we understand why and figure out how we can make it a positive touch point.
Right, it's almost worse when there's no reaction, because you know people making an effort to complain or to say it was great. At least they're making some type of effort to respond to whatever you're putting out there. And if there's no emotion, that's almost worse, I feel like.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so then, and you touched on some of this a little bit, and we're just going to do a quick recap. You mentioned, and I think, Anne, you can just talk about this real quick, that you don't have to do this full customer journey map of every event and everything that's happening with your organization. Is that true?
Right, yeah. I mean, you actually, before you start your whole customer journey mapping exercises, you really want to think about what is that customer journey map about? Is it about your entire customer life cycle, which could be, you know, you're looking at your entire membership of your organization or your customers and who they are, and you really want to dive deep into what is that experience like from the moment they find out and they actually experience you as an organization to the end, which could be, you know, after they've used your product and used your services to, you know, how do they still remain a member, and what is that experience like? Or it could be the sales or product lifestyle, which could be you've created this great product and you just really want to see from the start of when that person starts using that product to the end, like what was that whole experience like? Or it could be an event, such as many organizations have annual meetings, and you can map out the experience of when the person actually gets to that convention center, goes through a weekend of convention meetings and experiences there, and what all of those touch points are within that weekend are like, and so that you can look at that experience, and maybe at your next annual meeting you can create a better experience and more value, and find those opportunities to meet the need, what they're expecting at that event. So there's many different ways you can map out an experience, and many different opportunities to map experiences out. So, but the important thing is when you start a customer journey map to really know what you're measuring. So you have a beginning and an end.
Okay, that makes sense. Great. Well, now we're going to jump into the next stage where we're going to actually get into a customer journey map that we've picked Starbucks because we feel like it's a very relatable experience. At some point, most of us have gone into a Starbucks to get something, and we're going to show how to align some of these actions, the processes, and the resources it takes to make each interaction exceptional when you are doing a customer journey map. So we're going to get right into this. And I'll be honest, the first time I saw this, I had to have Melissa and Anne explain to me exactly what most of the stuff meant. But once they explained it, I got it and it made sense and it was really cool. So I'm going to have Mel kick this off and just give a quick overview of what we're looking at.
Sure. Okay, so yes, I understand. This is a little bit overwhelming the first time you look at it, but it can be broken down and it does actually make sense, I assure you. So like Kazan said, Starbucks is a pretty familiar retail experience. So we understand that, you know, we're familiar with what a Starbucks is, but we understand that there's a kind of finite life cycle there. You know, you think you're at your desk, oh, I need a little pick-me-up, I'm going to run over to Starbucks and grab a coffee. You kind of know what to expect when you go into a Starbucks. You know, you're going to wait in line, give your order, they write your name on the cup. You know, you go to that kind of end of the counter, you grab your cup at the end, so on and so forth. So we're pretty familiar as a society with the Starbucks experience. Most of us have been customers there. So if we look at this experience map, we're looking at the persona of a repeat customer. So you see in the upper right-hand corner there, they've got, you know, this. They've named this guy Eric. He's a repeat customer. His purpose is to work. You know, maybe sit down at one of the tables in Starbucks, take advantage of the Wi-Fi, do a little work there, maybe have a meeting, and to have some coffee. And when we look at the top half of this journey map, what we have is a dashed line across the kind of center there. And that is your baseline experience. And it's basically what I just described to you as, okay, I want some coffee, I'm going to go to Starbucks and get my coffee, and then I'm going to go sit down at a table and drink my coffee. So that's the very basic experience. But within any customer experience, you have a chance to have either what we call an enriched experience, so places where they've really elevated the customer experience and made it better, and those are the points that you see above that dashed line. Or we have the potential to have a poached experience, so things that are not so great. You know, maybe you walk in and the music is too loud, or it's too cold, or the floor is sticky. You know, and all those things below the line are places where they have an opportunity to improve, but there are things that they really need to pay attention to because, you know, maybe they're not paying attention to is it warm or cold enough in there? They're just thinking about, okay, well, the baristas behind the counter are comfortable, so they assume that the customers are comfortable. And there's, you know, somewhat of a disconnect there. So we need to make sure that we're really focused on the customer experience. And when you map this out and you can see, you know, here's the highs and lows, you see that there are a lot of opportunities beneath that baseline in the poached experience section where, you know, Starbucks could be doing a lot better here. And those are the places where we say, oh, there's a moment of truth. We could very easily make it better for, you know, the young mom who comes in with her crying toddler, and Kazan could tell you about the experience that she had recently. But we have an opportunity there to make her experience better and keep her as a repeat customer, and also keep the other customers who would be affected by the crying toddler, keep them happy too. So, you know, you see these moments of truth and you look for ways to make them better and to find an opportunity to enrich the customer experience throughout.
Yeah, and the experience that I had that Melissa's talking about is I have a almost 2-year-old, and I used to enjoy going to Starbucks. Not so much anymore because inevitably the minute we walk through the doors, she is not happy and doesn't want to stand in line. And so I recently, and I currently live in LA, I went grocery shopping and the Starbucks was right there, and I walked in and there was a line, and I was ready to just turn around and walk back out because you could see Ruby's face just going from, oh, I'm content, to there's a line, I'm not doing this. And someone, one of the employees walked up to me with a iPad with the square on it, and she asked me what drink I wanted, and she took my credit card right there and paid for it. And I don't know how they work it with everyone else, but they bumped my drink to the top, and I got in and out of there quicker than I ever have in most places in my life. And Ruby did not have a meltdown, and so it did not upset me. I will absolutely go back there again with Ruby, actually. And you could actually see the relief on some of the other people's faces standing in line of not having me and my screaming toddler standing in line, and she's kicking people in the back and trying to deal with that, and I'm embarrassed. So that was an amazing experience for me.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. So then when we start to look at some of these touch points a little bit more specifically, and this is where we're going to look at kind of this lower half of the map, we can start out with the anticipation. So this is where we're looking at both touch points and the phases of interaction, so as well as the events and activities that a person is engaging in during this customer life cycle. So during this first phase, we think about, okay, they're going to anticipate what is it that they want. They're at their office, they're thinking about, oh, maybe there's some places we could go grab a coffee, we need to get out of the office, we've been sitting here too long, we need a change of perspective, and here are all of our options. Then we're going to jump in the car, hopefully there's a close parking spot, hopefully it's not too crowded and there's plenty of places for us to sit. And what if we do walk in and it is too crowded? Maybe we're going to go down to, I don't know, Pete's Coffee down the street because that's comfortable as well. So these are all the things that people are thinking about before they even touch your organization. And some of the things you start to realize when you look at the retail experience, some of the things are out of your control. For instance, when you pull into a Starbucks, it's not really Starbucks' fault if there's no place to park, but they can think about where they position themselves, where they're located, so that hopefully there is plenty of parking nearby. So you can start to think of that in terms of your own organization and think, okay, so what are the kind of outside external forces, and how can we try to mitigate those or make them more comfortable for our customers? So then when we go to the next phase, you enter, and we've talked about and mentioned a little bit before how the website itself is really kind of the front door to your organization. So when you walk into a Starbucks, that's your introduction to that organization. It's your introduction to that experience. And you open the door and maybe there's a line, maybe there's not a line, maybe it smells good. You can smell the coffee. Maybe it's loud because the coffee grinder is going. There's all different types of impressions that you have that they've created in this experience when you go into Starbucks. So you need to really think about how you are creating impressions with your website as people come to it as the front door of your organization. When people enter, what kind of experience are they getting? Is it personalized? Do they feel like this is a place for me? Or do they look at it and go, oh my gosh, the font is too small, or that slider is moving too quickly, or this information is not what I'm looking for, or all I want to do is register for membership and I can't find the button easily. So you need to be aware of all of those impressions that people have as they enter the organization. Then we move on to the next one where people start to engage. So this is, when people are actually using the product, experiencing the product, using your organization. So with Starbucks, we know, it's a pretty familiar experience. You go up to the barista, you tell them what your order is, you tell them your name, maybe they spell your name right on the cup, maybe they don't, but that's a touch point. That's something that affects the way people perceive your business. When they spell your name correctly, you're a little bit happier than when they spell it like something that's clearly not even a name. So, we've all been in that experience and know kind of what the expectation is, even if it's not necessarily a positive encounter. And we want to think about that with our own customers when they start to engage with our websites and through our digital touch points. Do we have something like an online chat feature where people can ask a question online and talk to someone via the chat and get their answer? Or, does that chat feature work? So somebody types this question in the box. Is there a real person there to answer it? Or do they get an error message that says, oh, no one's minding the chat right now. Sorry, good luck. So, you really need to think about, if you have all these different components to your website, how are you going to make those really work for your users? And how do they affect your customers' impression of what they're seeing and of your organization? And then once you get past the point of engagement, people start to, they leave, leave either your website, or in this case, they leave the Starbucks. What are their impressions as they walk away? Do they have that moment of delight where they think, oh my gosh, that was so cool, that was great that they did this for me, it was, one step extra than what I expected, and I'm really pleased with my experience? Or do they think, oh, that wasn't the greatest, I was hoping for something more than what I got, or that was a really frustrating experience, or, whatever their impression might be. And I think this is a really important phase to consider, because when people leave your organization, if they have either a negative or a neutral experience, then it's definitely not a good thing, especially if they have a negative experience and they come back and tell somebody else about it. Ultimately, we want people to have a really positive experience and tell somebody else about it. So we really want to make sure people are getting what they wanted out of the experience, and that they feel like you as an organization really understand them and want to meet their needs, versus, okay, well, in the Starbucks example, they're just there to give me coffee. They don't understand that I'm there to have my coffee, but I also want to frequent their establishment and sit there and drink my coffee and maybe do some work, and it was really too hard to get on the Wi-Fi this time, something like that.
Yeah, and understand that you're being listened to. I think that's really important, because I don't know if other people are like me, but if I don't have a cup of coffee in the morning that is easy to get, it negatively impacts the rest of my day pretty badly.
Sure.
Yeah, and that really speaks to the bigger picture of the whole customer journey experience in regards to a website being like a retail experience, is that it's a really broader picture of it's more than just talking about your website. It's what was the marketing leading up to that person finding your website? Was your brand promise there when they got to your website? Were their expectations met? And then when they leave your website, are all of the things that they take from your website, are they still valuable to them? And are you going to be valuable enough to come back? Or are they going to reach out to your organization in a different way because they were so impressed and they got all of what they needed from your website, that the next step is really, maybe becoming a member, or, going to a meeting, or whatever it is. But that your website is just not, many organizations just put up a website to put up a website, and they don't really think of the bigger picture and the bigger impact on the organization as a whole. And so the whole customer journey experience is it creates that holistic picture of that entire journey for that person or member.
That's great. And actually, to tie into that, we have a question here about the behavior points here that we're looking at. So if we look at the question was, where did the behavior points come from? Like if we're looking at 9A, 9B, 9C, how, are they from role play? Are they assumptions being made? Are they observations, surveys? And we touched a little on this earlier, but if you could explain where these behavior points are coming from.
Right, so when you do a customer journey map, you really do gather your information from anywhere you can. It could be from surveys, it could be from your organization, actually having members of your organization staff really map out that whole experience and what they think is their customer experience, and then having your customers come in and mapping it out as well. And it's also, a lot of it is doing some ethnography, which is really sitting in the environment in which that person is experiencing that moment, that touch point. For the example of Starbucks, it's somebody really sitting in Starbucks and just watching the whole thing play out. And so you gather all of that information, and that's where those kind of different, I would say, accumulation of different touch points and the different thinking and feelings of that persona come from. So it really is an accumulation of all of that information coming together.
Right, and just to add to that, the ethnographic component that Anne mentioned is just so critical to a successful customer journey map, because a lot of times the things that we'll see when we do ethnographic research are very different from what we hear. So sometimes we'll observe things that people can't articulate. They don't even know what's happening because they have a particular frustration or challenge, and they just develop workarounds. They assume, okay, well, this is how this works, so I'm going to figure out a workaround, even though it's a little bit frustrating, even though maybe it's a little bit more labor intensive or time intensive. I know that I can work around this, but that's not necessarily a good thing, because we want people to have, you know, a premium customer experience, something that goes smoothly and is easy and meets their needs without them having to develop these extra things. So, you know, those are the kinds of things that we can see in ethnography that people don't necessarily articulate or can't really say, oh, it would be helpful if, you know, your organization did this for me. But those are other moments of truth, other places that reveal themselves throughout the research.
So it's really just, it's observing that reaction versus, like you say, being able to articulate what the frustration is.
Yep, absolutely.
Great. Well, talking about being able to articulate frustration, so obviously we know there are going to be challenges when we are facing the process of starting a customer journey map or going through a journey map. And I know, Melissa, you and Anne have actually seen these types of challenges when we are working with clients. So I'm gonna run through these, and you can explain a little more of what these challenges mean. But the first one we have here is things won't always be black and white. And that one, with the way we explain it, it seems like it's very simple. It's like, oh, well, here's your client experience. This is what they want, and here's what you should give them. But that's not always the case.
Right, it really is. I think a lot of times you start mapping out your customer journey and you see all of these things start popping up. And so it's not as black and white as you think it's going to be. It really creates, a lot. It brings all of this information together, and it can be very all over the place and a little bit overwhelming. But that's the fun part of customer journey mapping. You get to create something that really shows where opportunities lie within that customer experience, and they're not going to be black and white. Some of them are going to be a little bit messy, and how do we figure out how to fix this problem that's happening, or maybe it's the silos within your organization that aren't that really needs busting out, and everybody working together. So it's not always an easy process either. There's a lot of times questions that need to be asked that are sometimes uncomfortable for people to answer, or even to ask. So there's a lot of things that come up, and but it's something that's very valuable and very important, and just to be aware that to be kind of agile in the whole experience of doing a customer journey map.
Mm-hmm. Great, and then we're going to skip here to focus less on how pretty it is and more on how valuable it is. This is one I would have a hard time with, because I really like the way customer journey map.
I think a lot of people do, because everyone is very visually driven, and we want to see something that makes an impact and that wows us. And you see a lot of these very creative and interesting infographics, but then you look at them and it's really hard to make sense of things. So we want it to be, visually pleasing, but it's more about how functional it is and how useful it is. And it's really hard to say there's a one-size-fits-all template for what your journey map is going to look like. We never know when we begin the journey map process, or even when we're in the thick of doing our research, what the final deliverable is going to look like. It might be a booklet, it might be a bigger map, it might be, I don't know, a series of flashcards or something like that. It might be a flip book. It all just really depends on what we learned during the journey mapping experience. So we want to make sure that what we ultimately deliver is something that people can share within the organization, that somebody can sit down with and really spend a few hours on and get a lot of valuable information and generate some ideas of how to improve the organization through, reading through this in detail. Or somebody can just maybe quickly flip through talking with someone about it in a meeting, and you can still generate some ideas from that. So, we really want to make sure we're not focused on, is there a legend? Is there a map? Is there a color code? Are there, 15 icons that represent different things? That can kind of be a rabbit hole. So we don't want to go down that path, but really more focusing on, okay, what are the tangible, really useful takeaways?
Mm-hmm. And that actually leads right into the third challenge, which is you just mentioned position your map as a living document, not one that is set in stone. And you just mentioned you should always be able to find value and new ideas from this document.
Right, because, as we all know, the customer is always changing and always evolving. And as we create this map and we come up with opportunities and solutions to things, that customer experience changes. And so it's, it is a living document and one that changes as the customer grows or the customer experiences different things. So it's important to come back to it, to look at it, to reevaluate it, sometimes to start all over when things have changed a lot. So it's a really, a customer journey map is a really good way to make sure that your organization is not complacent, that it really is meeting the needs of where the customer is and what their expectations are. So it is always changing and always evolving.
Good point. Okay, with that, we are going to go into questions, and we actually have a couple of questions here. How do you know if you are ready for a customer journey map? Everybody's ready.
Yeah, I think everybody's always ready. Any organization that is looking to better serve their customers to create a more valuable customer experience, that's the time to do a customer journey map. And I think we can all agree that I think just about every organization and business is at that point usually. It's always a good beneficial exercise to do. You're always going to find out where opportunities are from it. And it's just whether you do it in a short version or a whole longer version of one and go really in deep with your customer experience, there's always value to doing a customer journey map.
Mm-hmm. And obviously there are some obvious signs as well. If you have customers that are complaining, that would be a very specific sign that it's ready for you to kind of reevaluate what you're putting out there.
Yeah, or even if you have, maybe you have a yearly event like an annual meeting and you've noticed that attendance on that meeting has dropped recently. It would be a great thing to do to go in and just map the experience of going to the meeting and figure out where people find value. The people that are still going to the meeting, what do they see as beneficial? Where do they see shortcomings? What would they like to see in terms of offerings? I think that's a great kind of way to get your feet wet, even if you aren't quite prepared to take on, journey mapping your entire customer life cycle. Maybe you can just map that little piece, and you really will get a lot of great insights out of that as well.
Mm-hmm. Right, and then we have one last question here, Melissa. I think it's geared towards you. How do customer experience maps differ from other or more traditional forms of user experience deliverables? And we touched on it a little earlier, but maybe we can just recap that.
Yeah, I think when the customer journey map, it doesn't, like I said, it doesn't capture every nuance of what a person experiences when they interact with your organization, but I think when we look deeper into specific user experience research, we are looking at a lot of those nuances, and we do look at, I think, more of the cumulative effect of maybe a negative or a positive experience. So I'm going to go back to the Starbucks example because I think that's a good way to describe it. But if you imagine that as a customer at Starbucks, you pull up and first there's no place to park, and then you finally do find a place to park, and you walk up to the door and you try to pull it to open it, and it's a push door. So then, you've had two barriers so far just to getting in the door. And then once you do get in the door, maybe there's a long line, or the floor is sticky, or the font on the menu on the wall is so small that you can't even read and decide what you want when you're waiting in that long line. So by the time you get up to the barista, you feel like they are pressuring you, and there's all these other people in line, and it's loud, and it's confusing, and you don't know if you're supposed to order a tall or a grande or a medium or a small, and it's all, that cumulative effect makes people feel stressed. So those are the things that we look at a little bit more specifically when we get into user experience research. But with the customer journey map, we're mindful of all those things, and a lot of those things we can observe during ethnography. But I think it's really important to see it as kind of this overarching customer experience rather than maybe some of these more granular experiences that we look at when we do user experience research.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Great. Well, I think with that, we are done. I think, Anne, do you want to impose any last parting words of wisdom for anyone taking on a customer journey map experience, or anyone who wants to talk to us about taking on a customer journey map experience?
Yeah, I think, it's just really, I think in this day and age of the customer who is really looking to have that experience that really goes above and beyond. This is where, we all are heading, and this is where we need to be, whether it's on your website, or whether it's your organization as a whole and meeting your members' needs, or whether it's a product that you're trying to deliver to that customer. It's important that we go above and beyond, and the only way to do that is to really know what your customers' expectations are, and know who they are and where they are, and have empathy for that, and really be customer-centric. And so the customer journey map is really, one of the best tools that can help provide those answers. And we've seen amazing results with our customer journey maps, and they've really highlighted some moments of truths that some are small and they are low-hanging fruit to fix, and some are very large and take some organizational strategy to address. But it really speaks to the power of the journey mapping experience and the value of it.
Mm-hmm. Great. And with that, actually, I know that Anne, Melissa, and I all think this way just in general most of the time because our jobs require it. But I'm going to challenge you a little. Next time you participate in anything where you have to have that experience, whether it's Starbucks or the grocery store or putting gas in your car, think about what that experience is and how you're interacting with what's happening around you. And maybe think about some ways that you would do things differently if you were in charge of that experience, and think about how you can apply that to what your organization is currently doing. I think that would be a good challenge. Okay, great. Well, Anne, Melissa, thank you guys so much. We really appreciate you taking the time to be on this webinar and explain to us a little more about what is happening in the customer journey mapping world. We really appreciate it. And yeah, thank you. And you guys have a great day.
Thanks, Kazan. Thank you.